one.
Well, happy Wednesday. Happy Memorial Day week here in the United States. Similar holidays, I'm sure, around the world. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here on Peikoff Wednesday, where James and I have the opportunity. Well, last week, of course, we interviewed all sorts of good people, good guests on the impact of Leonard Peikoff on their lives. If you missed that episode, make sure you catch up on that afterward. It is a must-see. But this week, we're back to it. We're back to the ideas of Leonard Peikoff. We are still using the reference book, Keeping It Real, the answers that Leonard Peikoff gave over the course of years to podcast questions that he was asked. The Keeping It Real collection, if you don't already have it, so grounded, so good. James, we have been talking about this for 50 episodes, and you have given us topics. The conversations have ranged from the minute to the broadest. James, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
I am doing so well. It's really hard to describe. I'm giddy happy these days for many reasons, and I hope everyone else is too.
Outstanding. Well, it is a somber week and yet a party week, and there have been discussions about this. I don't know how you feel about it, James, but I really don't have any problem with the fact that on Memorial Day we barbecue. We think of it as the kickoff to summer, so long as we also remember what got us there, what got us to the point of enjoying these values. And I think that's going to inform some of our discussion today. It's great to celebrate because you got to know what you're fighting for.
That is it. That was exactly, great minds, Mr. Nasir, think along the same lines. That is exactly what I was thinking. It is the wonderful times that we can have and celebrate and take time to, barbecue. That is the substance, the value of living our lives that it's really all about. The fighting is a necessary precondition for that sometimes, but the goal is living. And that's what it's really all about. Objectivism brings a unique perspective. It values and honors the service of people who fight for a noble country and for certain specific reasons, not because warfare is a value in itself. It isn't. It's a horrible thing. Of course, it never needs to really happen. It's only the product of evil. But humans have free will. These things happen. Evil is out there, and we do need protection to protect what? Our ability to live, produce, to pursue our happiness. That's what it's all about. And so barbecues are a particularly wonderful way. And the veterans I know would be happy that it's celebrated in that way, so long as their role in making it possible is acknowledged and appreciated.
Excellent. We have different holidays for different aspects of the military. We honor the military in several ways. Toward the end of our discussion today, we'll talk about the way Ayn Rand honored the military, a woman not even born in the United States, but who gave them more honor than I think most of us could. And we have Memorial Day this week. We are celebrating those who took on military, I shouldn't say service, a military career, and sadly made that ultimate sacrifice. Now we have Armed Forces Day for those who are simply active military, and we have Veterans Day for people who were in the military previously. I've got to say, I've got several veterans in my family, and on Memorial Day morning, we were at Parkview Cemetery, where some of our friends have been and family have been laid to rest. I am all for people enjoying that day, celebrating it, picnicking, doing everything. And it's not even bad that sometimes we forget what we're honoring, precisely because we don't have to spend that much time thinking about it because of these good people. And yet there are questions that come up in that regard. And James, you've chosen a few of them, questions that were asked of Dr. Leonard Peikoff. And we'll give those questions. We'll give some of his insightful answers. But I want to hear some of what you've got to say. As often happens, Dr. Peikoff's answers, they're poking their finger at me, saying, "You might not fully understand this one. Maybe you should talk to James." So the first question is, Leonard Peikoff was asked, "Can the destruction of evil be rationally pursued as one's primary creative work?" And the way the question is asked, well, here's Leonard Peikoff's the start of his answer. He says, Well, no, destruction is not creative. At the end of the destruction of evil, you have the absence of evil, which means you have devoted your life to producing a zero. Now, of course, when necessary and when you have the time and effort, and when you're confronted by a form of evil that is jeopardizing your values and your life, well, then it is absolutely important to devote your time to destroying it or defanging it, because under those circumstances, creativity is essentially impossible. But the point is that to liberate yourself from evil so that you can go to the thing which is really the primary, which is creation, not destruction, the creation of something of value. Destruction is never the primary. And he gives an example from the Count of Monte Cristo. He says, I remember Ayn Rand telling me how disappointed she was because in the beginning of the book, the hero was so heroic in escaping. But then the whole rest of his life is devoted to destroying the people who had been so evil to him. He had nothing positive as a motivation or to show for it. She was very, very angry at that book when she got to the end. And you might say, and here's our topic for the day, Leonard Peikoff says, you might say, what about the police and the army? Aren't they concerned primarily with the destruction of evil? No, they are primarily concerned with the protection of the innocent. And as a means to that, well, then they have to arm themselves and destroy the evil. Now, James, that's interesting because we've talked about this before. And you, although you didn't have a military career, you absolutely had a career where some folks might say, well, isn't James focusing his time and attention? Isn't he putting everything into the destruction of evil?
And in a sense, I was destroying evil, but that would be what I would call a byproduct. Evil as such is normally nothing to worry about. It is irrational. It is dishonest. It is unproductive. It is dependent. It is parasitical. And in most cases, evil can be ignored properly and it will wither on the vine and die its just death. Only when evil becomes a threat, a coercive physical threat to others, it must be addressed. But people do have free will, as we were saying earlier. We live in a world where I think people will always have free will. I think philosophy has created a world in which we have dictators running amok. Look at the savagery of most of the Islamic world. Look at the horrific dictatorship in China. Look at the rise of nationalist dictatorship in Russia. You look at the mullahs of Iran, and then you focus on the criminals here in the United States. All of these are philosophical phenomena, which in a better world might not exist, or at least would be discouraged to exist. But humans have free will, and there will be criminals, and there will be problems, so long as human beings have free will. But you know, the destruction of evil, as I say, is mostly something that we can fortunately ignore. It's only when it's threatening the good with force, making it impossible for creative work to happen. We need freedom so that we can pursue our own happiness, our individual lives, our productive careers, our romantic lives, our hobbies, our enjoyment of life, spending a Memorial Day at the beach or the park, having a barbecue with our family or friends. That's what it's all about, is living our lives. The destruction of evil cannot be the primary focus. When I was a DA, I did not risk my life in a way that police officers did, or much less the way people in the military overseas are risking their lives. But I was out there creating the conditions, and that's how I viewed it. Now, don't get me wrong, I had my little Honda, my white Honda, and my name is Valiant. So every morning as I went to the DA's office, I thought I was Prince Valiant on his white steed going to do justice. But I honestly want to tell, the part here I wanted to tell most about is, when you get a guilty verdict, when some horrific crime has happened, a murder, a rape, some terrible child molest case, some armed robbery in which someone maybe got shot, these are horrible situations. This is not good. And when the bad guy gets convicted, There's no popping of champagne corks. There's no confetti and yahoo, let's party. There's a sort of a quiet sense of relief. There's this, okay, thank goodness this guy's not going to be out there to do this to other people. Thank goodness we achieved justice in this case for this victim. It was for the victim. It was for the peace of the community. It was for all of their productive activities. And so it's when my victims can get, to whatever degree they can get past it and get on with enjoying their lives, that was the real warm fuzzy in me. It wasn't the, hey, I've defeated this evil guy and he's going to get what's coming to him. There's a quiet sense of satisfaction in that, but there's no great joy in terms of, all you've done is balanced out the scales of justice. All you've done is protect the community from further harm. Do not think that what you're doing is eliminating evil. And boy, my point in life is to really make evil people suffer. That's not the point. It really isn't. Now, there were times when I was threatened verbally. There was a time when the father of a defendant did come after me physically, but I have not faced the physical dangers that cops and soldiers face on a routine basis. Those people are willing to risk their lives for this crucial value on a regular basis, which means they regard the value of their peace and freedom that highly, and the peace and freedom of the people they love that highly. It would sort of be insulting to them to say that their mission in life is vengeance, like Edmond Dantes from The Count of Monte Cristo. Now, I loved the book and I wasn't so upset by the end, but I was disappointed. You mean Edmund, your whole life was all designed to get your vengeance on these guys who ruined you, instead of saying, hey, I'm free. I now have the resources. I can now reconnect with the love of my life. And maybe we can go off together and be happy someplace. No, that wasn't Edmond Dantes' focus, living his life. His whole life became like Captain Ahab and the Great White Whale, obsessed with his vengeance. That cannot be the focus. Ayn Rand said something so beautiful. Do not give evil or suffering any more attention than is required to deal with it, so that we can get on with what really matters, what really counts, living our lives, pursuing our own well-being, doing our productive careers, loving the people that matter to us. That's what matters. Just to be focused on destruction is to be focused on exactly the opposite of what the heroic act of protection really is all about.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. I don't know if Leonard Peikoff could have said it better, but question number 2 is exactly on that. And because he brings in the rest of us, the civilians, I want to read his question and answer real quick. Question number 2, Objectivism believes in the virtue of selfishness. How could an objectivist justify pursuing a career as a soldier, a police officer, or the like, since these professions are dedicated to public service? You get the heebie-jeebies when you hear those last 2 words there. And Leonard Peikoff answers, a soldier et al. Is not a social worker. He has a personal goal, which is liberty of his country, of himself, of his loved ones. If he's not fighting for that, well, then he's a bad soldier. He's fighting out of duty. Being a soldier or a police officer in this way, a person wants to have, being a soldier or police officer is the way this person wants to have a challenge, to use his mind, to be creative. Well, the result of his work is public benefit, but he's not a servant. And anyone in such a career who regards himself as a servant was no good. And then here's the point that I couldn't leave out, even though you pretty much gave us that already. He says, you could ask the same question about everyone. Well, how could you be a doctor since a doctor serves the public? Well, everybody does something and trades with others, but they have to have a selfish motive if they're to do it properly.
Brilliantly stated. Brilliant.
So, yeah, what are you fighting for?
What are you fighting for is what it's all about, And yes, it is. In this division of labor economy of ours, important that we have specialists. specialists in the military, specialists in law enforcement, and I'm going to say it like this: specialists in the use of physical force. The only proper use of physical force, of course, is in defense and in response and in retaliation to its initiation, to its aggressive use. But given the state of technology and the ongoing changes in technology, and given the fact that we do have these evil people, you have to have specialists who are experts in the use of force, better in the use of force than the bad guys. And thus, our military needs to have the highest training. They are specialists who are engaged in high-level thought. This is very challenging work. This is true in law enforcement. This is true for the military as well. These people are using their creative intellects, by the way. They are doing challenging work, and it is necessary, but under certain circumstances. But one might say a similar thing about farmers and doctors and everyone else who provides a value in the economy, shoemakers and tie salesmen. Everyone is producing a value, and by means of their specialization, they become really good at it. And we get the best ties, and we get the best cars, and we get the best, and hopefully we get the best military too, because we do need that. And these people are specialists, and these people are heroes because, you know, what they're after is a very high abstract value. These are people who can see the real world consequences of liberty. These are people who know the life and death consequences of this, but they're able to devote themselves to an abstract value 24/7, to an abstract value at that level, and realize that it is risking their lives sometimes. It is a matter of force. That combination does make them heroes, if in fact what they're protecting is liberty and individual rights. If they don't lose sight of the positive conditions that they're creating. Absolutely. What it's all about is, I mean, if it was all about service, if it was all just about serving someone else, then any war would do, right? So long as we got people to sacrifice, so long as we regimented them into this sacrificial army, what would it matter that they were fighting a good war or fighting for a comparatively free country? That wouldn't matter in the least, would it? The sacrifice would be an end in itself. But no, it is not. It is not. But these people are heroes because they do realize the importance of the abstract value of liberty. The life and death consequences of a high abstraction has reality to them, and one that they are willing to risk their lives for.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because the flip side of that would be, well, maybe not sacrifice, maybe the killing, maybe the destruction is an end in itself. We have a provocative question number 3. But before I get to that, I want to give a shout out to Free Trade, who was in with a super chat right at the beginning of the show. Folks, you know, if you put in a super chat, click that $, you are supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK. Any money that comes in supports what we do here, supports the channel, supports the organization, all of the good work that's being done. A lot of that, James, on your shoulders, between the many shows that you're participating in these days, as well as the study groups and sessions. So thank you for that super chat there. I know people maybe super chatted out a little bit because you were so generous during last week's 50th anniversary show and during my interview with Gene Maroney last week on Life on Earth. So thank you for that huge shout out. Thank you to those of you who are members of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Membership link, if you're not already, is right at the top of the chat there. Click that and go there too. Apollo Zeus says, tie salesman. Well, there's a profession that requires no sacrifice. But I swear, James, I did not know that we would both be wearing white today. I simply thought I should wear less than a frivolous Hawaiian shirt like I usually do on a day in which we're talking about people we really respect and honor.
That word sacrifice is a very interesting one because, you know, I would urge people to read Ayn Rand's essay, Causality versus Duty.
Yes.
What is often called sacrifice is total mischaracterization. It is paying the appropriate price for a high and important value. The more important the value, the more I am willing to pay for it, because that is there's a certain cause and effect requirement for getting that value. And sometimes it takes effort and thought and hard work. And to achieve that value often requires a high degree of long-term consistent effort. That's cause and effect. Paying a high price for a high value, as we've said on many of these shows, is not a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice to give up something for a value something that really isn't a value or a lesser value. Only that can be a sacrifice. So to call it sacrifice is somehow to say that the value that they're protecting is not worth it, is a lesser value. Oh, so living as a slave, or living in a dictatorship, or living in a Nazi concentration camp or a Soviet gulag would be preferable to you. You'd prefer to live in Iran under their theocratic, nonsensical regimes where women can't show a centimeter of skin. That would be preferable to you? No, as Ayn Rand says, it'd be preferable to live alone on a desert island someplace than it would to live in some Nazi concentration camp or in some totalitarian hellhole. The value that being protected here, liberty, is of the highest order, and therefore requires of us, sometimes at least, not always, but sometimes it requires of us a very steep price. And so the reason why I titled the show The Price of Liberty is just that. It's not a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice to risk one's life, to take extreme efforts, to take extreme long-term efforts at getting something if the value is high enough. That's just the law of cause and effect. And in a world with monstrous dictators like that, the value of protecting liberty in the West is surely way, way up there as one of the top values that needs protection, and why we should honor and be grateful for those who do this, who protect us.
Now, as I teased a bit, question number 3 is a bit quirky here, but it comes up because Leonard Peikoff was asked, well, is it in a rational soldier's interests to enjoy the act of killing the enemy? Now, James, you said there's more of a feeling of satisfaction it's a little more somber. You don't have parties, you don't pop champagne corks when some rapist who's done the worst thing in the world, oh, he got convicted, now we're happy. No, that's not how that works. And Leonard Peikoff answers this question, enjoy the act of killing, say, in general, I would say no. He says, in general. Now, right away, I kind of thought, I can think of exceptions to that, but of course, Dr. Peikoff's got me covered. He says, now, there may be specific personal cases where he gets pleasure. He may, for instance, be avenging another buddy in his unit or avenging a relative killed in the war. But as a general attitude across years, I would say no. A soldier is a professional like any other, as long as he's in that field. And the primary attributes he needs are cool judgment and use of his skill in all of the appropriate ways. This requires competence and full attention to the requirement of the job, not an inner bubbling over with relish of what you're doing. In other words, as a rule, I would say a soldier should get his satisfaction from the justice of the cause and the values it's achieving, such as freedom, rather than rubbing his hands and saying, I got another one of those bastards.
That's it.
Up to a point, that's okay, but as long as it's a peripheral thing.
God, she says it so well. You know, if I was a soldier in World War II and had an opportunity to put a bullet in Adolf Hitler's head, I won't deny it. There probably would have been a sense of satisfaction that a monster like that, who could kill millions of civilians and start a world war, you know, I won't deny it. I think I would have found some pleasure in putting a bullet between Adolf Hitler's eyes. Okay, yes. It's not because I want to kill a man, but because of all the horrific things he did, all of the tortures of the killings of innocent women and children that he's responsible for, that would give me a sort of sense of, yeah, get rid of him. But the truth is, it's not like that. The joy you get is the joy and the competency of doing your job. And that requires a cool head. It requires a cool head for a cop. It required a cool head for me as a prosecutor to do my job. I can't get wrapped up in, oh, the emotions of this evil criminal and I'm going to do vengeance for this. No, 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 no. I've got to keep my head focused. I've got to keep my eyes on the target. I've got to use my rational capacity in as passionately dispassionate way as I can possibly find. And that's how I'm going to do it. But the destruction of evil as such, the goal here is to protect liberty. The goal here is to protect people, innocent lives. The goal here is to save the world from some horrible totalitarian dictator who started a war. The goal is not to go out killing people. All other things being equal, it wouldn't have been wonderful if we never had to do that in the first place.
Well, we have talked before, and I'm sure we're going to talk again about improper wars. And there you get into a real issue of sacrifice, but it's more like human sacrifice. It's not the soldiers who are self-sacrificing. It's what our leaders, I don't even want to get into that too much because we're focusing on the positive. And what I love about Memorial Day, again, is not we say, oh, what a shame people died, but oh, what heroic lives they lived. They were willing to put it all on the line in the name of their values.
I'll just point out right here, Memorial Day was started in the 1860s, shortly after the Civil War, the bloodiest war in the history of North America, the bloodiest war America ever fought. And it was a war that was fought. It was really the completion of the American Revolution, in my view, the idea that all men were created equal. Lincoln turned it into a crusade against slavery. Now, when it's a war like that, when it is a war about human slavery and the future of the United States, can you imagine a more important cause? If at that moment America had been divided and made weak, or if the South had won and slavery hadn't been eliminated, imagine the difference to the world of today that would make. And so when I look back on it and I think about all those lives lost, those men and women are absolute heroes who changed the world for the better and made liberty possible for so many people. And when you think about that, and you think about that in contrast, say, to World War I, senseless, just madness war, or a war like Vietnam, total altruism America had no business doing. And then or the Iraq War, you mean these wars that we probably shouldn't have fought at all because they were just altruistic nightmares. And yet we send our soldiers out there to fight them. And even if they're the bad guys, and the Viet Cong weren't the good guys, Saddam Hussein wasn't a good guy. But even when we do these wars that we probably should never have fought, we take away their ability, the resources. We tie their hands with rules. We don't even allow them to fight a proper war and defeat the bad guy that we told them to go defeat. And so it adds to the poignancy of their willingness to defend the United States, when so often our politicians are sending them in to nothing, to no real end. I mean, look at the 20 years we spent in Afghanistan. How many American and British soldiers died in the last, 90% of that war should never have been fought. And there we are dying year after year. And for what, Robert? And for what, Robert? It is our policymakers that are the ones who have the blood on their hands in those cases. In my view, and the soldiers who deserve intense respect.
People have questioned objectivism's and Ayn Rand's crusade against altruism. But if self-sacrifice was not seen as a virtue, if it was seen as the senseless outrage that people should regard it as, we wouldn't have made it past 1 year in Afghanistan when it became obvious that our intention was not to win, but to achieve quote unquote diplomatic successes. I hate the idea of that because it's paper successes. It's empty successes on the backs and with the blood of American soldiers and the Afghanis who died in the process in numbers greater than ours.
Right.
Obviously, my priority is the American soldiers, but just the senseless bloodiness of it all and to
Defenseless.
no end, with no idea of what victory would mean. In a war, it's obvious what victory means. In a real war, in a just war, in a proper war, we know what victory is. It's not that complicated.
Right.
But this was not that.
You want to know what communist and Nazi altruism looks like? It's real easy to see the tens of millions who die there. But you want to know what altruism in America looks like? It looks like World War I, and it looks like Vietnam, and it looks like all those senseless lives lost over the decades in Afghanistan. That is it. Innocent young people dying to no real end. That gets me irritated beyond my capacity to even articulate.
You talk about the Civil War, and I could go on and on about that. But the Civil War, as you say, which completed the American Revolutionary War, was followed by, well, of course, they criticize it by calling it the Gilded Age, the Great Age of the late 1800s. And people don't necessarily appreciate what that means, not just for the United States, but for the world at large. There is a reason why the United States, this young country, barely 250 years old, has outstripped every other nation in the world, not just in gross domestic product, but in inventions, in creation, in production, in new business ideas, and even in a global economy like ours, countries where, for example, they may fabricate more integrated circuits than we do. It's because of what we've done. And the reason for all that, respect for the individual, liberty, which ultimately means respect for the individual mind and reason. You can't compare what the United States achieved to anywhere else in the world, and it's entirely because of liberty. The Civil War was the worst war in the American history, as far as the number of American lives lost, even more than World War I. And yet it had to happen precisely for that reason, because it was a war for liberty, for the individual, for the sanctity of the individual life. And it made this the greatest country in the history of the world.
Man, did you just say a mouthful? In the 60 years that followed the American Civil War, never in the history of humans on this planet have humans experienced such a radical improvement in life expectancy, the well-being, economic well-being. More people were brought out of poverty. More people were brought into an unprecedented prosperity than at any other place and at any other time in all of human history. If you think about what was going on in the 60 years that followed the American Civil War, what came about? Oh, let's see, recorded sound, radio, electric light, human mechanized flight. So we just got, airplanes, telephones, light bulbs, electric generators. The revolution that occurred for human well-being in that period is unprecedented in all of human history. And that is what it was all about. That's what the American Revolution and the Civil War were all about, is creating a world that could do that and lift so many people out of poverty and give them an entirely better lifestyle and make the living part better. It wasn't the killing part that's the value in itself. No, that's only a condition when necessary to make all that productivity and happiness and human life possible.
Right. It makes me that much more outraged at today's libertarians, supposedly the only large voice talking about liberty anymore, since the right has now become no more reliable a cult than the left, that they don't understand liberty. They don't understand the point of liberty is simply to unleash the individual human mind, individual human values and effort. A man living his life for his own sake is the greatest generator of values. We saw inventions in the late 1800s, early 1900s around the world. We weren't the only country inventing things, but why? Why did the United States outstrip everybody else in the numbers? I have enormous respect for England as a civilizing force, but they had the leg up on us of hundreds of years. And we surpassed everything that the UK did. I love the UK. I mean, go to London, look around. It's jaw-dropping. It's beautiful. Why did the United States become the single most productive, most inventive country in the world? And the answer is, that's what our soldiers fight for. That's what our military protects. Freedom, liberty, the freedom to figure out what you want to do with your life and then go out there and make it happen, and use human reason to achieve everything that has made life magnificent. And again, that's why, well, we'll talk in a minute about the respect that I think objectivists have for our soldiers, much more than those who, they get the lump in their throat, and mostly for good reasons, but then talk in terms of sacrifice and the ultimate sacrifice. It may be the ultimate price, but it's not a sacrifice. People are fighting for their values, and in that regard, let me jump to question number 4, because it was a multi-part question in which the questioner, says, I don't agree with most of what our military is doing currently. Well, James, you've covered that, and we'll talk about it some more. But then he gets to this question in his question. He says, well, I love the selfishness of this. I think the highest moral reason to join the military has to be the selfish reason of protecting one's own life, freedom, and loved ones. But, and then he asks Leonard Peikoff this, well, what are your thoughts in regard to joining also for career-related reasons? Well, in my case, I'd like to be involved in space exploration, and being a jet pilot is one of the best ways to get into that field. I love questions that virtually answer themselves. When he says, you need selfish reasons, and then he offers a selfish reason, it says, well,
here's another selfish reason.
So unsurprisingly, Leonard Peikoff answers.
What's wonderful is that he understands the theoretically selfish thing, that why anyone might do this in a free country, but I have my own particular selfish reasons that he adds to it. That only adds to it.
Which is, it's kind of what this book is all about, is we know these ideas. Now, what does that look like in reality? So Leonard Peikoff says, well, absolutely, it's perfectly right. In fact, it's morally necessary for you to go into this field, because there's something that's exciting for you to do with your life. It's not enough for you to say, well, my selfish desire is to protect my life and my loved ones, therefore I'm going to give up my passion, say, for being a doctor or an architect or whatever, and go into that field that I hate. That would be self-sacrifice.
That would be.
You've got to do what you want and what makes you happy, within the context that it is a rational undertaking. So I would say, Leonard Peikoff again, I would say to you that if you keep your eyes open and know what you're up against, well, go ahead. The military is like every other area. It is deteriorating. Again, he's referring back to the earlier part of the question, but we've kind of covered that. It is deteriorating, but if it has valid jobs that make you passionate, don't let the deterioration stop you. Just don't expect that a few bull sessions with a general or whomever, you're going to change the fact of what the military is becoming. Again, full respect for the military, but at the general's level, or especially at the politician's level, what our military does that isn't proper. So love the question, love the answer, and it really drives home the point. Yaron Brook often talks about risk tolerance. Well, people who join the military, they know the risks, and that's baked in, it's calculated in, and they are there for their own values.
Absolutely. The way that question starts is just classic Leonard, the Leonard I knew. If this is if you're clear that this is your great passion in life, then that's the moral thing. Anything else would be immoral. The moral thing you need to do is go pursue your passion. If you're clear about what your passion is, it would be immoral for you not to pursue your passion. That is Dr. Peikoff all over. I heard him say that, I don't know how many times, in a dozen different formulations to different people. Well, you're clear about what you want? Well, it'll be wrong for you to do anything else. I just love the way he approaches it that way, because people are so shy and reluctant about their passions, about what really drives them, their joys. Then Leonard would just always be, wait, what's more important than your joy? It's wrong for you not to pursue what makes you the happiest. I just love the start there of the answer, but he's so right. And I think that the really the key point that you were getting to, I think the next question here will really bring out and clarify. So let's get to that.
That's true. There's a kind of a false alternative that might come up for some folks, and our questioner brings it up in question number 5. If we tell our soldiers to focus on, well, doing the work they love, as Rourke does, wouldn't winning a war become irrelevant? Because all that matters is whether they love their jobs. There's an artificial separation if I ever heard one.
Right.
But I can't do it justice. So we'll read Leonard Peikoff's answer. That's all very fine, but if they love their job, what is their job? A job has a purpose. If it's a rational job, you're trying to accomplish something. There are some values at stake. It's not just the technical skill of the actions involved. It's the fact that that technique and those actions are directed toward a certain achievement. Well, if you're a soldier, before you talk about loving your job, you have to know that your job is to win the war, assuming there is a war. You learn all the skills involved with that in mind, and that's what you love to do. For instance, there's a situation today, and he answered this in January 2011. There's a situation today that I heard discussed at the Air Force Academy. I don't know the technical term, but there are some bombs that can be dropped either by airplane at great risk to the pilot over hostile territory, or sent by remote control from perfectly safe territory. Cadets were asked, now which would you rather do? Carry the bombs live or push the remote button? Now, the great majority said, well, they would rather carry the bomb live, even at risk to their lives. Now, these were kids who wanted the thrill of flying, of course, but if they tried your method of justifying it by saying, well, I love bombs, that's my work, apart from the results. Well, even though the remote might be the thing that would win the war, well, then they would be completely wrong. They would be loving the wrong thing, and it would be wrong by the standard of what the goal is. And he wraps up his answer this way. He says, creative work has a purpose beyond just its performance. You know, you could just as well say, what about the doctors under Nazism who worked diligently to remove perfectly healthy organs from the bodies of some of the victims in the concentration camps? Well, they loved their work, without reference to what the purpose was. Well, in this case, it was no purpose other than torture. You know, ends and means. Anyway, unquote Leonard Peikoff. There's ends and there's means. And to say, I love the means, I love the action, and I have no idea what it's all for, what it all adds up to.
Can you imagine Howard Rourke saying, well, I really want to build this beautiful building, but after 2 years, of course, it'll crumble to the ground. That's how I hear that question. That's how I hear that question. No, the work is, the love of the work, of course, is the motive. But loving the work means you want to do it well. I won't get any pride, self-esteem, reward from the challenging job if I'm not doing the job well and getting the outcomes, at least most of the time, that I want. I mean, the whole point is you can't divorce outcome from the way you're doing the job. And nor did Howard Rourke divorce outcomes. There were moments, there are contexts in the Fountainhead, which is what raises the question, where Howard Rourke sees, say, the Stoddard Temple getting defiled, and he has to explain to people like Dominique, well, it stood, and that was my goal. But you know something, if people hadn't come along and corrupted it, it would have stood, because it's a Howard Rourke building, it would have stood for centuries. And so the point, though, is would he have built a defective building? Did he think he was building a building for no end? Would he have built a house like a factory? Would he have built a skyscraper that would collapse into? No. General George S. Patton said something very, very wise about the sacrifice of men in war. And he was one of the great field generals in World War II, of course. He said, no dumb bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. The point of going to war is not to create martyrs and heroes so that we can build statues and honor their, quote, sacrifice. If sacrifice were the end, we'd just send people out like fodder, and we'd chalk up the biggest number of casualties, and we'd have the highest moral credit, I suppose, because we'd have the highest number of casualties. No. No, the point is to defeat the evil, to protect liberty, to save our lives, thank you. And we were not out there to create heroes and martyrs, if you will. The point is to win the war, to win the war. Patton also said many wise things. The only good thing about war is its quick termination, and therefore we need to be armed to the teeth, extremely skilled, carefully thoughtful. We need to be after the enemy and defeating him physically and psychologically. That is the goal. And really, if you're going to engage in war, the point is to end it just as quickly and successfully as possible. War in itself is not a good thing. It is one of the great, horrible, senseless, monstrous tragedies in this world. It is generated by evil. It is caused politically by dictatorship. Dictatorship, as Ayn Rand points out, is the fundamental political cause of war. And so it has been in history. We don't need war. We could live perfectly happy, wonderful lives if there was never another war again in human history. But I can guarantee you, unfortunately, because of human free will and our current context, there will be more wars, alas. And for that, we need to have the most skilled, competent people who will achieve the end, of victory, and who will protect our lives and our freedom and that of our families. Yeah, that's what the heroism is. That's what it is. You can't approach a war altruistically in any sense. Either a war like the whole war, like Vietnam, was a total altruistic mess that should never have been fought, and tens of thousands of people died senselessly but even tactically, forget the wider strategy, it even tactically cannot be fought in an altruistic way. You're trying to make the other poor dumb bastard die for his country, not recklessly go out there and die for your country. That's not the point. You wouldn't want a reckless soldier who is out to, quote, die for his country. That would be, however bravely he did it.
Leonard Peikoff has been criticized for his stand on war after the 9/11 attacks, for example. But can you imagine if his advice, for example, to turn a substantial section of the Middle East into a glass parking lot, was actually followed? Not just how many American lives would be saved, how much better would the whole world be if that moral stand had been taken? I think of the book Nothing Less Than Victory from, unfortunately, we lost John David Lewis. But you're exactly right. The purpose of war is to defeat the enemy, to end the threat, to reestablish freedom.
Right. Had we not, look, they were using mosques as covers for their military activities. If we hadn't had any of these qualms about attacking mosques, then the psychological point would have been all the stronger. And if we had turned Tehran into a waste zone, we wouldn't be having the problems with Iran up to this day. No, of course, you have to psychologically crush the enemy. You have to physically defeat the enemy. And nothing less will do. And I highly recommend the book you recommended as well. It's a brilliantly written book, by the way. But no, can you imagine approaching violence in a way where you think that violence is the end in itself, or that dying is the point? Only the corruptions of mysticism and altruism can make that possible, that mindset possible, which is unbelievably common in this world today, as if there's some nobility to senseless sacrifice. Only altruism and mysticism can justify that kind of perversity.
Yes. Real quick, because we have another super chat from Free Trade. Thank you for that. And this time he has a comment. He says, speaking of pursuing your values and old wars, I'm touring the old town in Tallinn. Beautiful architecture and old fortifications here. So free trade apparently is in Estonia today. Well, outstanding, beautiful. If you want to see architecture that has survived from the 1300s, that's got to be a heck of a trip you're on. But thank you for that super chat. Very much appreciated.
Kind of a cool trip, yeah.
Excellent. And yeah, not only do I think of, well, if we had won those wars, but the lesson for the world, it drives me crazy right now that the tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa in the Middle East. And we know that the UAE is much more rational than their neighbors, and the money all came from oil, and the architects were all Western architects. But the message
of the world,
the message that victory would have sent, and the message isn't the United States will kick your ass. The message is reason wins, freedom wins over tyranny, over irrationality, over unreason. Again, nothing less than victory could have made that point, and we would be so much further along. Would we even have countries like Russia attacking Ukraine? Would North Korea still be the threat that it is if we weren't dancing with those dictators in the Middle East?
Amen, my brother. Amen. No, we usually sanction it, fund it, support it economically and technologically, and then end up having to fight it, and then fight it in ways that are without any moral clarity and in a way that only sets up still another fight and appeases them because we never got to the moral issue.
Yes.
Alas, that is the recent history of the West attempting to fight evil.
Yes. Incidentally, Kindred Amy in the chat says, I love Estonia. I want to go. And then she reminds us, watch The Singing Revolution. This was great how the people of Estonia brought the positive and not just the fight into the revolution there. And because it's Amy, I've got to point out, Amy had posted recently, there was a bit of a brouhaha because Kamala Harris, I still can't get over that Kamala Harris is the vice president of the, I can't get over the fact that Joe Biden is president of the United States, but better than the alternatives? Maybe, but still, how the hell? So Kamala Harris was the first woman ever to give a commencement speech at West Point. Oh, okay. And a lot of objectivists said, well, no. Somebody much better, much more important did that back in 1974 and delivered the speech, Philosophy Who Needs It. Well, there was some clarification. That speech wasn't the commencement speech, but still, Ayn Rand, 30 years, 40 years before Kamala Harris ever had a chance to talk to those boys, and with much more worthy. So thank you for that, Amy. Thank you for
50 years ago. Ayn Rand, she did not address the graduating class as a whole, commencement, but she did address a class at West Point. Universities often will have people come in and guest speakers come in. Ayn Rand, as I understand it, was the first woman to address West Point cadets in any context, and that was 50 years ago. Very interesting. But Ayn Rand, of course, gave her magnificent speech, Philosophy Who Needs It, to them. And here she was, a woman who'd escaped from Soviet dictatorship, and this was still at the height of the Cold War against the Soviet Empire. Although Ayn Rand was a fierce opponent of the draft, as you know, and a fierce opponent of the Vietnam War as a senseless act of altruism on America's part, which are both true, nonetheless, she went and defended the entire tradition of the American military in West Point in some of the most eloquent and moving ways possible. 50 years ago, Philosophy Who Needs It. I highly recommend everyone go check out that speech.
Yes, it is a brilliant explanation of the importance of philosophy, but she does tailor it to the audience. Toward the end of the discussion, she says this, to the West Point cadets, you have chosen to risk your lives for the defense of this country. I will not insult you by saying that you are dedicated to selfless service. It is not a virtue in my morality. In my morality, the defense of one's country means that a man is personally unwilling to live as the conquered slave of any enemy, foreign or domestic. This is an enormous virtue. Some of you may not be consciously aware of it. I want to help you realize it. And she says this a couple paragraphs later. The principle of using force only in retaliation against those who initiate its use is the principle of subordinating might to right. The highest integrity and sense of honor are required for such a task. No other army in the world has achieved it. You have. I won't go on because she says more, but you need to read it for yourself. And besides, it's hard to read this out loud without getting choked up. That speech, philosophy, who needs it?
Feel the tears welling at the sides of my eyes right now, just hearing it.
And she makes the point, again, she is a woman who came from the worst dictatorship in the world. The numbers of people killed by the Soviets, their own people, just that she makes the point that she respects America more, for example, than perhaps some people who were born here. And she rose to become, and she didn't say this about herself, but she rose to become the greatest champion of liberty, who could justify it in terms that I think have saved us in many ways and many times over. And that she was able to give this speech to these soldiers, these cadets at West Point Military Academy.
They loved her. They gave her a standing O, and she had a very positive relationship with them. But you can imagine why. Here was a woman who had come from a terrible dictatorship that the American military was then protecting the West against, and she appreciated them, and they could feel that her appreciation was real. She says it so beautifully. There's nothing to be said after that. Ayn Rand said it, as usual, better than anyone could have.
Yes. So to the extent that our military men and we civilians and all of us in this country and really around the world understand, as you put it, James, the price of liberty, I think we owe a huge debt to Ayn Rand and to all of the great thinkers. But I can't think of anybody who has justified it better than Ayn Rand. And James, I thank you for this discussion. Again, Memorial Day week here in the United States couldn't be a better time to talk about this.
I think it's important to take a moment and to thank those people who did make liberty possible. The West would not be the West today. It's true that it required first philosophers understanding liberty and its basis, at least to some extent. It's true it required the Enlightenment and a period of reason. It required people to see the power of reason and the power of freedom in action. So we need philosophers, we need intellectuals, we need farmers to feed us. But we also needed the American revolutionaries. We needed the people who fought against slavery in the Civil War. We need people to protect our liberty, and they make it possible. I can really think of, when you think of moral heroes, they're moral heroes in a very, very special way. And Memorial Day is, I think, extremely important that we honor people who fought for freedom, the good guys, the free countries, and made all that possible and make a productive, happy world possible for the rest of us.
Excellent. Well, and of course, the Ayn Rand Center UK is doing its part. In fact, we got some great shows coming up. Real quick, later today, Lee Pearson, he's every other week, so he takes weeks off, but he is back today with a show entitled Imagination, Emotion, and Cognition. He says, in this episode, we will discuss the question of, with regard to cognition, are imagination and emotion essential, optional, irrelevant, or antithetical? I'm going to love this discussion because when we talk about consciousness, well, at root, it's the faculty of awareness, but it does include imagination and emotion and memory and all these aspects of consciousness. I'm looking forward to hearing Lee Pearson and his group of intellectuals he invariably has on his show discuss that one. Let's see.
Life on Earth sounds good too.
we do have, and it hasn't been posted yet, so I just asked our producer who says, yes, we have an upcoming TDO, The Daily Objective, in an hour. And it's going to be Nikos Sotirakopoulos will be on how socialist movements and countries supported all the works of regimes and thugs, well, the worst regimes and thugs. Perfect tie into our discussion today, and especially as we brought up the topic of improper wars. Hopefully, we'll have less of that, and Nikos will help straighten it out for us. Which are the proper wars? So thank you for sending that. Now, I've got to say, with regard to the Daily Objective, in 5 days, it is the Daily Objective's third birthday, the third anniversary of TDO episode. The number is mind-boggling, 766. So that's going to be good. I want to see that birthday celebration.
We are planning, so I can't tell you what it is, but we're planning something very, very special for that day that you guys won't want to miss. But I also have to put a plug in for you. Your recent interview was just amazing in the last episode, but tomorrow you have a Life on Earth episode that also looks interesting, and I urge everyone to check it out. You have been doing some astonishing work these days, Mr. Nasir.
Well, thank you.
Very insightful.
You're right. Last week it was easy. I didn't have to do any work. Well, I did. I did a lot of prep, but only what made it easy is I had a co-host. Amy Nasir came back on, co-hosted with me. She's usually too busy with the day job for that, but she made it happen. And the reason is we brought on Gene Maroney, had a great discussion. So thank you. And I agree. It was a great episode. I'm not taking the credit, but I'm absolutely agreeing that that was a must see. Tomorrow's going to be fun because tomorrow we go from the sacred, our respect for the military, to the, I was going to say from the sacred to the profane, but it's really not. Tomorrow's episode is entitled Pride Month, right on target.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just give you that teaser because I'm going to talk about pride, compare that to Pride Month, but I'm going to make some connections that you just might find startling. And there are some values in this discussion, if not necessarily in everything that people are doing about it. So yes, thank you for that. Join me for that. TDO in 1 hour, The Daily Objective, Nikos Sotirakopoulos, The Cutting Edge at 10 o'clock UK time, 5 o'clock on the East Coast here, or 2 o'clock James out on the West. And great shows coming up. So thank you for that. Thank you for my super chatters. Well, free trade was carrying all the weight today, but I know that y'all have been supporting us. Contributions have been very generous. Please don't stop. Keep it up. If you're not a member, become a member already. And James, especially shout out to you. Thank you for today's questions. Thank you for today's discussions. Again, my respect for the people who are willing to fight for ideas is enormous. It's why I love and respect Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff. But my respect for the people, again, who have gone out in the field and have fought for this country is also enormous. And I appreciate that we could have this discussion.
Me too. Thank you, Robert.
And thank you, listeners. Have an outstanding afternoon. Join us in an hour. We will see you then.
Be well.